I believed silence kept the peace. Looking back now, I can see how that silence started to shape our days. We talked about schedules instead of feelings, about groceries instead of worries. When she spoke about her fears, I listened, but I didn't always respond in a way that let her know she wasn't alone in them. I thought listening was enough. There were moments, small ones. A look that lingered a second too long. A sigh she didn't explain. Times she asked, "Are you okay?" And I said yes because it was easier than sorting through the real answer. I didn't see those moments as warnings. They felt like background noise. Life has plenty of that. In my 40s, my career finally stabilized. The hours eased a bit. The kids were older. I assumed we were entering the easier part. I remember thinking, now we can relax. Now there's time, but habits don't disappear just because circumstances change. By then, not talking had become our normal. We sat in the same room, reading different things and comfortable in a way that didn't require much effort. I mistook that comfort for closeness. There were arguments, of course, but they were brief, controlled. We resolved the surface issues quickly. Who would handle what? Who was responsible for which obligation? I took pride in how reasonable we were. What we didn't resolve were the things neither of us knew how to name anymore. She stopped asking certain questions. I noticed that, but I didn't push. I told myself she was respecting my space. I didn't consider that she might have been giving up. I remember one evening clearly. We were in the kitchen. The kids were out. She was washing dishes, and she said, almost casually, "Sometimes I feel like I live alone, even when you're here." I dried a glass and said, "That's not true," without really thinking. She nodded and went quiet. The conversation moved on. Or rather, it ended. I didn't follow up. I didn't ask her what she meant. I assumed if it mattered, she'd bring it up again. She didn't. Years have a way of smoothing over moments like that while they're happening. They don't feel sharp until much later when you look back and realize how much weight they were carrying. By the time I was in my 50s, we functioned well. Bills paid. Holidays managed, family photos taken. From the outside, we probably looked steady, dependable. People used words like solid when they talked about us. Inside the house, the quiet grew heavier, not hostile, just thick. We spoke kindly. We weren't cruel. That's what makes this harder to explain. Nothing was obviously wrong. I thought absence of conflict meant health. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, aware of the space between us in the bed. I told myself this was normal, that long marriages settled into something quieter. I didn't know that quiet could be a kind of erosion. The first time she mentioned counseling, I felt blindsided, not angry, just confused. I said, "What for?" Genuinely. She looked tired when she answered, not upset, just worn down. "We don't talk," she said. I wanted to argue with that. We talked all the time, I thought. But even as the thought formed, I realized how thin it was. We exchanged information. We coordinated lives. We rarely shared ourselves. I agreed to go, but I went like someone checking a box. I answered questions carefully, thoughtfully. I still didn't say the things I'd never learned how to say. Old habits don't loosen easily, she tried. I can see that now. She reached for me in ways I didn't recognize as reaching at the time. I kept meeting her with politeness instead of honesty. Silence feels safe when you're young. It feels controlled. It feels like strength. I didn't know it could also feel like abandonment to the person sitting across from you. That realization didn't come until much later, when something happened that couldn't be smoothed over or postponed or handled with reason. When the quiet we'd built our lives around finally collapsed under its own weight. If you want me to continue, should I go on with part 2? It happened slowly, And then all at once, the way things always seem to when you're looking back, she got sick first. Nothing dramatic at the start, just tired more often. Headaches she brushed off. A cough that lingered longer than it should have. We were in our early 60s, and everything felt explainable by age. Doctor's appointments became part of the routine, folded into the calendar alongside everything else. I went with her. I sat in the chairs. I listened. I nodded. I did all the right things on paper. What I didn't do was ask her what she was afraid of. I didn't tell her what I was afraid of either. We stayed practical, focused. I thought that was being strong for her. One afternoon, after a test result we didn't fully understand yet, she sat on the edge of the bed and said, "I don't think you know me anymore." I remember feeling offended by that, quietly offended. We'd been married for decades. How could that be true? I said something like, "Of course I do," and reached for her hand. She let me, but her grip was loose, absent. That night, I lay awake again. The ceiling was the same as always, but something in me shifted. I started to sense that the silence I'd relied on wasn't neutral. It had shape. Wait, consequences. The diagnosis came a few months later. Serious, but not immediately terminal. There was a plan. Treatments. Schedules. New routines layered on top of the old ones. We moved through it efficiently. Friends called. Family visited. People said we were handling it well. I nodded and thanked them. Inside, I felt like I was watching my own life from a distance. There were moments during that time when she tried to talk, really talk, about her childhood, about things she'd never said before, about regrets she carried quietly. I listened, but I didn't always meet her there. I didn't know how to step out from behind the version of myself I'd been for so long. I was afraid that if I started speaking honestly, I wouldn't know how to stop. One evening, after a long day at the hospital, she said, very softly, "I wish we had argued more." I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She turned her face away from me and said, "At least then I would have known you cared enough to fight." That sentence landed somewhere deep, but I still didn't unpack it. I told myself there would be time. After treatment. After things settled. After we weren't so tired. After. The treatments took their toll. So did the waiting. She grew quieter, not in the way I was quiet, but in a way that felt like retreat. I sat beside her, held her hand, watched television together. We shared space constantly, but we were running out of time to share truth. One night, she woke me up and asked if I remembered the first apartment we lived in. The radiator, the couch dinners. The way we used to talk about everything. I said yes. She said, "I miss that version of us." I wanted to say I did too. I wanted to say I didn't know how we lost it. I wanted to say I was sorry for every moment I chose silence because it felt easier. What came out instead was, "Things change." She nodded. Again. That was the last real conversation we had. She passed away early one morning while I was sitting in the chair beside her bed. The room was quiet except for the machines. I held her hand and told her I loved her. I don't know if she heard me. I hope she did. After the funeral, people told me I was strong. They told me she knew how much I loved her. They told me I'd done everything I could. I let them believe that. It was easier than correcting them. The house felt different without her. Not just emptier. Stranger. The silence I'd always trusted now felt loud, accusing. Every room seemed to ask questions I'd never answered. I found notes she'd written over the years. Nothing dramatic. Grocery lists. Reminders. A few old journals tucked away in a drawer. I didn't read them all. Some felt too private even after everything. But I read enough to understand what she'd been trying to say to me for years. She wrote about feeling unseen, about wanting to be known, even in the messy parts, about how my calm made her feel alone in her emotions. She never called me cruel, never blamed me outright. That might have been harder to bear. It's a strange thing realizing that you were loved deeply and still failed someone in an essential way. Time doesn't fix that. It just gives you more space to sit with it. Now, at 76, the days are long. I have acquaintances, family who checks in, conversations about weather and aches and grandchildren, but there's no one who knows my inner weather anymore. That was something I let slip away without realizing how rare it was. Sometimes I rehearse conversations in my head, things I would say if I could sit across from her again. They're not speeches, just small truths, admissions, questions I should have asked. I don't do it to punish myself. I do it because memory is one of the few places left where she's still reachable. If you're listening to this, I'm not telling you to talk more. I'm not telling you to argue or confess every passing thought. I'm just telling you that silence isn't empty. It fills up with things, assumptions, distance, unspoken hurt. I thought love was something you protected by keeping things smooth. I didn't understand that sometimes love needs friction to stay alive. If this meant something to you, you don't have to do anything dramatic with it. Just notice the quiet in your own life. Ask yourself what's living inside it. As for me, I've made peace with many things. Not all of them. Some regrets don't ask to be resolved, they just want to be acknowledged. I still sit at this table. I still drink my coffee in the morning. Sometimes I speak out loud just to hear a voice in the room. Sometimes I sit with the silence and let it be what it is. I loved her. I know that now more clearly than I ever did when she was alive. I just wish I'd let her hear it in all the ways that mattered while there was still time.